Now that Kamen Rider Gavv is finally coming to a close, there is no better time but to give every rider their perfect Pokemon typing. And unlike the rest of the Reiwa era, Gavv uses a rather simple gimmick, being snacks as their power source. And I'm not gonna lie, it made giving each rider typings extremely hard. So with that in mind, I decided to put in real world aspects and how the foods are created while also looking at their designs and abilities. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it with our main rider being Kamen Rider Gavv. Now Shoma's base form is called Poppin Gummy, and I decided to give it the fairy fighting type. And in case you didn't know, Gavv is a rider based off of gummies. I know, shocking information. Which when I think of fairy types, I kinda think of Pokemon such as Slurpuff or Alcremie, and gummies just seem kind of adjacent to those. And the fighting typing represents his combat style in this form. And as for Punchin' and Kicking Gummy, I think that they should act as a fighting Terra type since they really don't change the suit that much. But they do give him a boost in his kicking and punching power, much like a Terra type. But up next we have our potato chip form being Zaku Chips. And for it I decided to go with the steel typing but also give it the grass Terra. And the reason for the steel typing is because he uses swords in this form, and he has to hit the sword at the right angle to actually cut something, or they snap. And as for the grass Terra, it's a reference to how potatoes are actually made. But up next we have Hiri Chips, which is steel fire. And this is literally just Zaku chips, but they're spicy, so they made his swords catch on fire. But up next we have the Michelin Man form itself, Fuamalo. And I decided to go with fairy fighting. Now Fuamalo falls in the same category as Poppin Gummy, where I just feel like it lines up more with mons such as Slurpuff and Alcremie and all of those. So I just figure the fairy typing just fits. But with this form, Shoma basically becomes the Michelin Man and has a sumo wrestler like build, so the fighting typing just fit. Now Chakodan is one of the forms that I spent a long time thinking about, and I came up with the typing of grass ground. And Chakodan is not the easiest to give the typing to. He's a gunslinging cowboy form rather than something simple like a fire sword form. So I went with how chocolate is formed, which is with a cocoa bean. Plus when I think of this form, I just think of the Wild West, so ground typing kinda just fits. Moving on, we have our big boy form being Gorokan. And obviously I gave it the steel type. This is literally just Shoma's robot form, so obviously I was gonna give it a steel type. Moving right along, we have our Christmas form being Bushel, which by the way, I didn't know what a Bushel was until Gavv came out, but I decided to give it the steel fairy typing. If you didn't know, Bushel is based off of a Yule log, which is a large piece of wood set to burn during the days leading up to Christmas. Then in the 19th century, a sweet sharing the same name was created. So that's why Bushel was given the steel type to reference an axe. Also, it's a cake, so I remember Pokemon like Alcremie. But speaking of cake, we have good old reliable caking, which I decided to give it the fairy steel type, but also give it the stellar Terra type. And just like with Bushel, it reminds me of Pokemon like Alcremie. So that's where I got the fairy type from. While the steel typing is more of a reference to the fact that he's a king. But in this form, Shoma gains access to whipped soldiers, which are able to use as weapons from previous forms, which is why I gave him the stellar Terra type. Also, they kind of represent Knight's form too, so that's where the steel typing kind of fits in as well. Up next, we have Blizzard Sorbet, which is a pure ice type. And I decided to give it the stellar Terra type because it can literally do what caking does, but just better. But back on topic, this is just an ice cream form. What was I gonna give it? The fairy type? Nah, this is a pure ice type. He literally has a blizzard attack, can create ice glaciers, and freeze dry someone. Yeah, this is definitely an ice type. Moving on, we have our partial final form being Overmode. And I decided to give it the fighting dragon type. Now in this form, Shoma lacks speed for power, which is where I got the fighting type from. And as for the dragon type, the helmet just feels very draconic to me, so I figure it was more unique than saying pure fighting. But as for the other half of his final form, we have Master Mode, which I gave Electric Dragon. And this is literally just the inverse of the last form. I went with electric typing to represent the lack of power for speed. And also in this form, Shoma bolts all across the battlefield, so the electric type really fits. And as for the dragon typing, it's literally the same reason as Overmode. Moving on to our extra final form, we have Amazing Gummy, which I decided to give it the fire fighting type and give it the dragon Terra. This form gives Shoma a burning passion that literally melts away Boka's ability and even his body, giving him power to take down the president. This form also gives Shoma a balance between his previous two forms, but doesn't really have the super speed part. So I decided to give him the fighting type to represent his power and his physical ability. And the Dragon Terra is literally because of the design. Moving on to our hyper battle form, we have Shield Snack, which I decided to give it the fighting type. But when he's using the ground T assist, he gains the grass type. In this form, Shoma uses nunchucks and fights kinda in a kung fu style. Hell, I'm pretty sure he's dressed like a panda bear too. Is that a reference to Po from Kung Fu Panda? Moving on to our movie form, we have Hexenheim, which I decided to give it the Dragon Dark type. This form is rather unique as it looks vastly different from any of the other forms. And I always felt like this form was like, what if Shoma was showing more of his Granute side than his human side? And I mean, it's much darker than the other forms. But as for the dragon type, it just screams dragon to me. Plus he has a castle Gochizo, so it just screams fantasy to me. Lastly, I decided to go with one of his weirder looking forms being Party Scone, which is a pure rock type. I'm not gonna lie, this one's a rather weird form and I don't know how they got Scone from that. But moving on to our secondary rider, we have Kamen Rider Valen with Chakodon. And I decided to give it the grass fairy type. And the reason for the grass typing is the same for Chakodan. It's a cocoa bean. But I decided to give him the fairy type since it's very similar to Shoma's base form, which is fairy type. Moving on to Domaru, we have grass fighting. Again, it's the whole cocoa bean stuff. I'm not gonna keep on repeating myself. But Domaru is much more of a brawling type form for Honto. He used it mostly to gang up on a Granute with Shoma, which almost made it into a wrestling ring. And again, with each of these forms, I'm trying to be a little bit more unique with them, so please let me know if you agree down in the comment section below. And while you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button down below and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss out on any future Kamen Rider videos. But moving on, Valen also has a Bushel form, which is Steel Fairy. And this is literally the same form as Shoma's Bushel form, just instead of vanilla or whatever it was, it's chocolate. Not dark chocolate though. But I also wanted to give him the grass Terra type to represent that chocolate. But moving on, we have Valen's Berserk form, which is Chokehold, which obviously is a dark poison type. This form basically represents dark chocolate, which is why I gave it the dark typing. But it also represents his relationship with Shoma kinda being distant because of Suga. While the poison type represents the literal chokehold that Suga had on him by basically poisoning him with every use. But moving on, we have his super form, which is Frappe, which is ice water. Now, while this is supposed to mirror Shoma's Blizzard form, it also is just a frappe, which a frappe is just iced coffee with some whipped cream on top. So I decided to give it both the water and ice type to represent that it's not entirely ice cream. But moving on, we have to talk about the best rider in the entire show being Kamen Rider Vram. And obviously his base form is Pudding Custom. And I decided to go with the fairy typing for this because puddings are normally associated with Pokemon like Alcremie and Slurpuff, similar to how the other base forms were. But as for his Jelly Custom, I decided to give it the Poison Fairy type. And obviously the fairy typing is because of the reason before. And as for the poison typing, this form actually takes a toll on Lakia's heart, specifically when he uses his ability to make himself invisible. But as for his Putting a Law form, I decided to go with Steel Fairy. And this form just gives Lakia a bunch of armor, not like he really needed it. But moving on to the villain side, we have Kamen Rider Bake, which his base form and only form is Break Cookie, which I decided to go with Fire Dark. And in this form, Suga literally gets baked, hence the name. And he's an evil rider and a damn good one at that. Dare I say the best in the entire show? Evolto vibes. But moving on to our many bitter Gavv forms. Starting off, we have Sparkling Gummy, which is Dark Fighting. And this is just evil Shoma, so I decided to add the dark typing to replace the fairy typing. It's literally just a mirror of Poppin Gummy, so that's where I got the fighting type from. But it could also reference the different fighting styles of the many clones, as each of them does have a different fighting style. One being a jokester, one being a musclehead, and one just being a raw fighter. But moving on to Break Cookie, we have Fire Dark. This is literally just Kamen Rider Bake, wrap it up. Up next, we have Jeep's form being Baki Baki Sticks, which is Steel Fighting. But I decided to give it the Dark Terra type. And the use of his sticks kind of reminds me of how Shoma uses his swords in his Zaku Zaku form, which kind of makes sense given that it's a potato sticks form. As for the fighting type, it represents Jeep's will to fight after getting his ass handed to him time and time again. And the Dark Terra is because he's part of the Stomach family. But guess what? Suga's back with Marble Break Cookie, which I decided to give him the Fire Dark type, but also give him the Psychic Terra type. And again, this is literally just an upgrade to Break Cookie, which also is a retooled Bake. But I decided to give it the Psychic Terra type to represent the granted ability that Suga got implanted with. But moving on, we have our movie riders being Kamen Rider Caries C1, which obviously is a poison dark type. Caries is basically a play on words of cavities, which is when your teeth develop plaque, which is also bacteria. And Caries is also the evil rider of the film, so his dark typing just fits. But Caries also gets another form being Caries C3, which is also a poison dark type, but I decided to give it the dragon terror type. And it's literally the same reason as before, it's just a play on cavities. And this form just looks very draconic. Hell, it even gets a cape that just screams medieval. But also his transformation is very monstrous. I can't show it because of copyright, but go look it up on Twitter. It's crazy. But that's gonna do it for this Kamen Rider Pokemon typings. Do you agree with these typings? If not, let me know down in the comment section below. Also, let me know which series you want to see me do next. We've already done the entire Reiwa era, so we're heading into the Heisei era. And while you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button down below and subscribe with notifications on. I've got a bunch of content coming out and I don't want you to miss it. And with that, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I'm FalPlays and I'm out. Peace. Also, huge shout out to our Berserk level channel members. Without them, videos like this wouldn't be possible. Massive thank you to Gochizo Poppin Gummy.